Most people spend their entire lives chasing success, and that is precisely why it keeps running away from them. Let me say that again, because I want you to really sit with it. Most people spend their entire lives in pursuit, working harder, pushing more, grinding through the early mornings and the late nights. And yet, despite all of that effort, despite all of that energy, success somehow remains just out of reach, a little further, a little more, just around the next corner. And I want to suggest to you today that the problem isn't the effort. The problem is the philosophy. Now, I want you to understand something. When I use the word philosophy, I don't mean something abstract. I don't mean something that belongs in a university lecture hall. I mean the way you think, the way you see yourself, your work, your relationships, your future. Your philosophy is the lens through which all of life is filtered. Change the lens, and everything you see changes with it. That's not a small thing. That's everything. I remember being 25 years old and standing in the kitchen of a small rented house in the early spring. I can still picture the yellow curtains, a detail that has no business being this vivid after all these years. And looking at the few dollars I had left and knowing, with absolute clarity, that something was wrong. Not with the economy, not with the government, not with my employer or my neighborhood or my circumstances. Something was wrong with me, with my thinking, with my approach to the whole enterprise of building a life. I had been chasing. I had been running after things. And I hadn't stopped long enough to ask, why aren't they staying when I catch them? That spring, a man named Mr. Earl Schoaf came into my life and changed everything. Not because he gave me money, not because he handed me an opportunity on a silver platter. He changed everything because he changed the way I thought. He said something to me that first afternoon that I wrote down on a notepad and kept for decades. He said, "Jim, success is not something you pursue, it is something you attract by the person you become." Now, I've had nearly 4 decades to think about that sentence. I've turned it over in my mind the way you might turn a coin, examining every surface. And the longer I've lived, the more convinced I've become that those words contain one of the most important truths a person can encounter in their lifetime. Success is not something you pursue, it is something you attract. That's not just a pleasant saying to put on a poster. That is a fundamental shift in how you must approach the whole of your life. Because chasing is an outward activity. Attracting is an inward discipline. And the world has a way of giving to those who have prepared themselves to receive it, and withholding from those who haven't, no matter how desperately they reach. Here's what I found to be true. The marketplace, and I use that word broadly, to mean the world that rewards and compensates people for their contributions. The marketplace doesn't pay you for your needs. It pays you for your value. Now, that may sound harsh if you've never heard it said plainly before, but I assure you, it is one of the most liberating ideas a person can embrace. Because needs are passive, needs just exist. But value can be built. Value can be cultivated. Value can be grown, season by season, year by year, through the consistent application of what I call the daily disciplines. Some people hear the word discipline and immediately feel a kind of resistance, a tightening, an image of deprivation. But the disciplines I'm talking about are not punishments. They are investments. Every day you read, you are investing. Every day you practice, you are investing. Every day you choose the harder thing over the easier thing, you are depositing something into an account that will one day pay dividends you cannot yet imagine. The farmer understands this. My father was a farmer, and I watched him from a very young age, and I understood without anyone having to explain it to me that the farmer does not expect to harvest the same week he plants the seed. He prepares the soil first. He plants carefully. He waters. He weeds. He tends. And then, and only then, in the season appointed by nature, the harvest comes. Not because he demanded it, not because he chased it across the field, but because he had done everything necessary to attract it. Life is exactly like that. Exactly like that. Let me ask you something. How long have you been waiting for your harvest while neglecting the planting? How many years have you been standing at the edge of the field, looking out at the horizon, wondering when the abundance will arrive, while the soil behind you sits unturned? That's a hard question. I know it is. I'm not asking it to shame you. I'm asking it because the day I honestly answered that question for myself was the day my life began to actually change. There are really 2 kinds of people in the world when it comes to success. There are those who are always trying to get more money, more recognition, more advantage, without first asking what they need to become in order to deserve more. And then there are the few and it really is a small number, who have accepted the quieter, slower, more demanding work of becoming the kind of person that success naturally flows toward. But here's the remarkable thing. The second group doesn't work harder in the conventional sense. They don't exhaust themselves more. In many cases, they actually seem calmer, more deliberate, more at ease. But inside, in the habits of their days, in the disciplines of their mornings and evenings, they are building something invisible to the casual observer, something that the marketplace will one day recognize and reward in ways that will seem, to those who only watched from the outside, almost miraculous. But it's not miraculous. It is predictable. It is the natural consequence of seeds planted with care and tended with consistency. Let me talk for a while about what I mean when I say you must work harder on yourself than you do on your job. This was Mr. Schoff's phrase, and when I first heard it, I'll be honest with you, I wasn't entirely sure what it meant. I was working hard at my job. I thought that was the answer. Show up, put in the hours, follow the instructions. And yet the results of that approach had been, to put it generously, underwhelming. I was 25 years old with a wife and a young child and exactly nothing saved, and a growing sense that my best years might already be behind me, which is a terrible thing to feel at 25. Mr. Schoff smiled when I told him how hard I was working, not unkindly. He smiled the way a man smiles when he recognizes something he's seen before. He said, "Jim, wages make you a living. Profits make you a fortune. And the difference between wages and profits is not in how hard you work, it's in how much you're worth." Working harder on yourself than you do on your job means this. It means that your self-development must be at least as serious, at least as scheduled, at least as non-negotiable as the work you do for whoever signs your paycheck. It means that the hours you invest in reading, in learning, in sharpening your mind and expanding your understanding, those hours deserve the same respect as the hours you spend at your desk or behind the wheel or on the phone. Some people read one book a year, maybe one book every few years, and then they wonder why their thinking hasn't changed, why their circumstances haven't shifted, why the same problems keep showing up wearing different clothes. Well, here is a simple answer to that. The mind that created your current circumstances is not equipped to solve them. You must build a different mind. And the primary tool for building a different mind is sustained, serious reading. Now, I'm not talking about scrolling through articles on your phone. I'm not talking about the passive consumption of information that fills our days with noise but deposits almost nothing lasting. I'm talking about sitting down with a serious book, a book by a man or a woman who has thought deeply about something important, and reading it carefully, and thinking about it, and reading it again. Miss a meal, but don't miss your reading. That was something my mentor said to me early on, and I've carried it for 50 years. Miss a meal. You won't starve if you skip a meal. But miss your daily reading. Miss your time of mental nourishment and philosophical growth, and something in you will begin to slowly atrophy in ways you might not notice for years. And by the time you notice, you've lost significant ground. If you read one book a month on your craft, on your industry, on human nature, on philosophy, on the principles of building a life, in 1 year, you will have read 12 books. In 5 years, 60 books. In 10 years, over 100. Do you have any idea how rare that is? In a world where the average person reads fewer than 1 book per year, someone who has read 100 serious books on the art of living and the science of achievement is an extraordinary rarity, and the marketplace recognizes rarities. The marketplace rewards people who know things that others don't know, who can do things that others can't do, who see things that others simply don't see. That's what reading builds. Not just knowledge, perspective, the ability to see further, to think longer, to approach problems with the calm confidence that comes from having the mental resources to actually solve them. And here is the thing about self-education that I find most profound. Formal education will make you a living. It will give you access to a career, to a profession, to a starting point. And that's valuable. I'm not dismissing it. But self-education, the kind you design yourself, the kind that never ends, the kind that is driven by genuine curiosity and honest ambition, self-education will make you a fortune. Not just financially, I mean a fortune in every dimension, in understanding, in relationships, in the quality of your daily experience, in the depth of your satisfaction at the end of a life well examined and well lived. Let me now say something about the role of associations in all of this. Here is one of the most underestimated forces in a human life: the people around you. Your associations, the 5 or 10 people with whom you spend the most of your time. I want to suggest to you, carefully, respectfully, but with complete conviction, that those people are shaping your future more powerfully than almost any other single factor. You cannot spend years in close association with small thinkers without beginning to think small yourself. You cannot immerse yourself in conversations that are always about problems, always about other people's failings, always about what can't be done and why things won't work. You cannot marinate in that kind of atmosphere without having it seep into your own thinking. It's not a character flaw, it's not weakness. It's simply the natural consequence of what I call the law of association. On the other hand, and this is the hopeful side of the same coin, if you can find your way into the company of people who are growing, who are reading, who are building something, who take personal responsibility seriously, who believe that they can construct a better life through better decisions and better disciplines, if you can spend time with those people, even small amounts of regular time, you will find yourself expanding. You will find your thinking shifting. You will find yourself setting bigger goals and taking them more seriously and feeling less embarrassed about your ambitions. I remember the first time I attended a seminar where serious people were talking seriously about serious subjects. I was in my late 20s, and I walked into that room carrying the habits and the expectations of the community I'd grown up in. And those weren't bad people, please understand. They were good, hard-working, decent people. But their ceiling had become my ceiling, simply by proximity. And sitting in that room, listening to men and women who had built substantial lives and were willing to explain exactly how they'd done it, something opened in me. A window I hadn't known was closed. That's what the right associations do. They open windows. Now let me ask you something important. When you look at the 5 people you spend the most time with, and I mean really look, honestly, and without sentimentality, are they pulling you up or pulling you down? Are they expanding your thinking or confirming your limitations? Are they asking you hard questions or keeping you comfortable in the same patterns you've been in for years? I'm not telling you to abandon people you love. I'm not telling you to be cold or calculating about your relationships. But I am telling you this, because someone needs to say it plainly. If you want to change your life, you must change your associations. You must find people who are living the life you want to live, doing the things you want to do, embodying the values you want to embody, and you must spend more time in their orbit. Some people resent this idea. They hear it as elitist, as abandonment. But here's the other side. When you become more, when you grow, when you develop your disciplines and build your skills and expand your thinking, you bring that back to your community. You become the person who opens windows for others. You become the association that lifts someone else's ceiling. That's not abandonment. That's the greatest contribution one person can make to another. Now I want to talk about something that I consider central to this whole conversation, and that is the question of your philosophy. Not just what you know, but how you think. Because here is a truth I've observed over many decades of studying why some people flourish and most people stagnate. It's not intelligence. Some of the most intelligent people I've known have lived the smallest lives. Not for lack of capacity. They had tremendous capacity. But capacity without philosophy is like having a powerful engine in a car with no steering wheel. All that power and nowhere to aim it. Your philosophy is the collection of beliefs and assumptions you hold, mostly without examining them, about how the world works and what you deserve and what is possible for you. Most people have never seriously examined their philosophy. They inherited it from their parents, from their culture, from the neighborhood they grew up in, from the particular slice of history they happened to be born into. And because they've never examined it, they don't realize that some of those inherited beliefs are quietly working against them every single day. Here's an example. Some people genuinely believe at a deep level that financial success is somewhat immoral. That people who have a lot of money probably got it in ways that weren't entirely honest. That there is something noble about struggling. Now, they might not say that out loud. If you ask them directly, they might deny it. But you can see it in their behavior. You can see it in the quiet sabotage that happens every time they start to make real progress. You can see it in the subtle discomfort that settles in when things start going well. Their philosophy, inherited, unexamined, has programmed them to reject the very thing they say they want. Examining your philosophy is not a comfortable process, but it is an essential one. Because once you can see the beliefs that are running your life, you have a choice about whether to keep them. And choosing consciously, deliberately, which beliefs to hold and which to release, that is the beginning of genuine self-direction. Here is what I have found to be true about the philosophies of people who attract success. They share certain convictions that the average person either doesn't hold or holds only loosely. The first conviction is this, that what happens to them is primarily the result of their own choices and disciplines, not luck, not circumstances, not the economy or the government or the family they were born into. Now, I want to be careful here, because I am not naive about the fact that circumstances are not equal. They are not. Some people start with advantages that others don't have. That's real. But I have seen too many people succeed from difficult circumstances, and too many people fail from advantageous ones, to believe that circumstances are destiny. They are not destiny. They are a starting point. What you do from the starting point, that's the story. The second conviction shared by people who attract success is that they can become more than they currently are. Not just that they should, or that they ought to, but that it is genuinely possible for them to expand their knowledge, their skills, their discipline, their thinking. This sounds obvious, but it's actually relatively rare. Many people, somewhere in their 30s or 40s, quietly close the book on significant personal change. They know what they know. They are who they are. The best they can do now is to manage the life they have rather than build the life they want. And once that conclusion is reached, even unconsciously, the attraction stops. You cannot attract what you have already decided is beyond your reach. The third conviction is the willingness to delay gratification. I've said this 1,000 times in 1,000 cities, and I'll say it here again, because it never stops being true. The ability to plant in the spring and wait patiently through the summer and the fall and the early frosts of winter, trusting that the harvest will come. That ability is perhaps the single greatest differentiator between those who build lasting success and those who spend their whole lives looking for shortcuts that ultimately lead nowhere. Every shortcut has a cost. Every attempt to skip the seasons has a consequence. You cannot harvest in the spring. You simply cannot. Nature doesn't negotiate on this. Neither does the marketplace, which obeys its own set of natural laws with perfect consistency. I want to talk about the seasons for a while, because I think this metaphor holds more truth than most people initially recognize. Life comes in seasons, not just literally, the change of weather, the shift of years, but philosophically. There are seasons of planting, seasons of growth, seasons of harvest, and seasons of winter. And here's what I want you to understand about all four. Spring is the season of opportunity. It comes every year, whether you're ready for it or not. Now, here is the question. Are you prepared when spring arrives? Do you have your seeds ready? Do you know what you want to plant? Do you have the skills and the disciplines and the resources to act when the opportunity appears? Because spring doesn't wait. Spring doesn't knock on your door and say, I'm going to stay here for an extra 3 months while you get yourself sorted out. Spring comes, and if you're not ready, it passes, and you wait another year. That's not tragedy. Winter teaches us patience, and there is always another spring. But there is also only a limited number of springs in a lifetime, and each one squandered is a cost. Summer is the season of sustained effort. The seeds are planted. The plan is in motion. Now comes the long, often unglamorous work of tending, watering, weeding, fighting off the insects and the unexpected frosts. Summer is where most people stumble, because summer doesn't have the excitement of spring's new beginning or the satisfaction of fall's harvest. Summer is just work. Consistent, patient, disciplined work. And the people who can embrace summer, who can find meaning and even pleasure in the daily disciplines, rather than always reaching ahead to the harvest, those are the people who consistently reap what others can only observe with envy. Here's what I see in summer. Some people, when the work of summer gets difficult, when the weeds come back, when the weather turns unpredictable, when progress seems invisible, they abandon the field. They convince themselves that this particular crop wasn't meant for them. They find a new seed, a new opportunity, a new beginning, and they plant again in the same undisciplined, impatient way. And then summer comes again, and they abandon the field again. I've known people who have planted 100 different seeds in 100 different summers and never once stayed long enough to see a harvest. Not because they lacked intelligence or effort or desire, but because they had not yet developed the philosophy of summer, the willingness to tend without the immediate reward of fruit. Fall is the harvest, and most people understand fall. Fall is the reward. Fall is when the work of spring and summer becomes visible. Fall is the paycheck, the recognition, the result. But here is what I want you to notice about fall. Fall comes to those who planted well and tended faithfully, and it simply doesn't come to those who didn't. There is no appeal. There is no negotiation. The harvest is a direct and honest reflection of everything that preceded it. But here is something that often surprises people about fall. The harvest is almost always more than the seeds planted. I said it earlier. You reap what you sow, more than you sow, later than you sow. If you plant one kernel of corn with care, it does not return to you as one kernel of corn. It returns as a stalk with multiple ears, each ear bearing hundreds of kernels. That's the nature of compound return. That's why patience has such an extraordinary payoff. Not just equal returns, but multiplied returns. But you must wait for the right season. And then there is winter. Winter is not a mistake. Winter is not the universe punishing you. Winter is the season that tests whether what you've built has depth or whether it was only surface. Some people fall apart in winter. Their confidence disappears. Their disciplines crumble. Their philosophy, which was perhaps not as solid as they thought, begins to show its weaknesses under the pressure of cold and darkness and the absence of immediate reward. But the wise person, the person who has spent time building a genuine, examined, deeply held philosophy, that person uses winter differently. They use winter to study, to plan, to sharpen their skills, to deepen their reading, to examine what worked and what didn't in the seasons past, and to prepare more thoroughly for the spring that they know, with absolute certainty, is coming. Winter always ends, every single time. The spring always comes. The question is only whether you'll be ready for it. I remember one particularly difficult winter in my own life, financially, personally, in every dimension. And I remember sitting in my study on a gray January morning with a pot of coffee and a legal pad. And I wrote down everything I had learned in the previous year. Everything that had worked, everything that hadn't, every decision I wished I'd made differently, every discipline I had neglected. And at the end of that exercise, I had several pages of the most honest self-assessment I'd ever produced. And then I asked myself one question. Given everything I now know, what must I do differently when spring arrives? That question, and the seriousness with which I answered it, turned that particular winter into one of the most valuable seasons of my life. Not because the cold was pleasant, it wasn't, but because I chose to use it as a teacher rather than curse it as an enemy. That's the difference, ultimately, between the few who attract success and the many who chase it. The many respond to their circumstances. They are reactive. Winter comes and they complain about the cold. Summer comes and they rejoice, without understanding that the rejoicing belongs to those who are tending their crops, not those who are simply enjoying the warmth. The few respond to their philosophy. They have a set of principles about effort, about patience, about reading, about association, about personal responsibility that guides their behavior regardless of the season. Now let me turn to something I consider one of the most profound aspects of this whole idea of attraction versus pursuit, and that is the question of your personal development versus your goal setting. Most of the popular literature on success, and there is a great deal of it, enough to fill several large libraries of varying quality, most of it is obsessively focused on goals. Write your goals, visualize your goals, repeat your goals. And I am not dismissing goal setting. Goals are important. Clarity about what you want is important. Without a destination, any road will do, and you'll probably end up somewhere you didn't intend to be. But here's what I've noticed. Most people who are struggling have plenty of goals. They can tell you exactly what they want. The house, the income, the relationship, the freedom, the recognition. They have the goals written down, sometimes quite elaborately. What they don't have is the matching personal development. They want a harvest that requires 1,000 hours of careful tending, but they've only put in 100. They want the reward of someone who has read 60 serious books, but they've only read 6. Here is the principle I want you to take away. Your goals reveal what you want. Your habits reveal what you are. And what you are determines what you will attract. If you want a different harvest, you must plant different seeds. But more than that, you must become a different kind of farmer, more skilled, more patient, more systematic, more philosophical. Because the level of harvest you attract is always, always a reflection of the level of farmer you have become. This is not discouraging. This is actually the most hopeful idea in the world, because it means that the ceiling is not fixed. It means that growth is always possible. It means that the distance between where you are and where you want to be is not measured in luck or circumstance or the favor of others. It is measured in personal development, and personal development is entirely within your control. Let me ask you something about the value you bring to the marketplace. Here's what I found to be true, and this took me a long time to understand fully, so I want to explain it carefully. The marketplace doesn't care about your effort. I know that sounds cold, but stay with me. The marketplace rewards value, and value is not a measure of how hard you've tried. It is a measure of what you can actually deliver. Now, I'm not saying effort doesn't matter. Of course it matters. Effort is what produces value over time. Consistent, directed, disciplined effort, applied to the right activities, in the right direction, for a sufficient period of time. That's the recipe for building genuine value. But effort alone, undirected effort, effort without the guidance of a developing philosophy and a deepening skill set, that produces exhaustion more reliably than it produces wealth. Here's the question I asked myself when I was 25 years old, and Mr. Show first raised this idea with me. I asked, what would I need to know? What would I need to be able to do? What would I need to become in order for the marketplace to willingly pay me significantly more than it is paying me now? And what I found when I answered that question honestly was humbling. Because the marketplace wasn't underpaying me. It was paying me exactly what I was worth at that stage of my development. I was making the wages of someone with my particular set of skills and disciplines and understanding and attitude. The marketplace is not cruel in this way. It is simply honest. Raising your income, then, is not a matter of demanding more. It is not a matter of working longer hours for the same hourly rate. It is a matter of becoming more valuable, of expanding what you know and what you can do, and how clearly you can think, and how reliably you can deliver results that other people need. And that is always possible. It is always within your reach. But it requires the kind of work that most people are not willing to do. Not the visible, performative, look how hard I'm working kind of work, but the quiet, consistent, daily disciplines of self-education and self-improvement that transform a person over years. Now let me spend some time on the question of attitude, because I think it's one of the most misunderstood aspects of personal development. When most people talk about attitude, they are talking about cheerfulness, about enthusiasm, about projecting energy and positivity. And those things have their place. But when I talk about attitude, I mean something deeper. I mean the fundamental orientation you have toward life, toward challenges, toward your own potential. Here is the attitude of people who attract success. They are genuinely grateful for what they have, even when what they have is modest. This is important because ingratitude creates a kind of static, a noise that interferes with the clear reception of good things. The person who is always bitter about what they lack, always comparing their situation unfavorably to others, always rehearsing the injustices and disappointments of their story, that person creates an internal environment that is actually hostile to growth. Gratitude, on the other hand, creates a certain clarity, a certain openness, a willingness to notice and act on opportunities that the bitter person simply cannot see. They are curious about everything. They are genuinely, persistently interested in how things work, in what people have learned, in the principles behind the patterns. This curiosity is the engine of self-education. You cannot force a person to learn something they have no interest in. But the naturally curious person doesn't need to be forced. They are drawn toward knowledge the way a plant is drawn toward light. They take complete responsibility for their results. Every time, without exception. Not in a self-punishing way. That's not what I mean. But in the clear-eyed acknowledgement that their current results are the product of their previous decisions and disciplines, and therefore their future results are within their own power to change. This is, I believe, the single most transformative philosophical shift a person can make. The moment you stop explaining your life in terms of what was done to you and start understanding it in terms of what you are doing, in that moment, you become genuinely powerful. Because victims cannot change their lives, only authors can. And they are patient in the deepest sense, not passive. Patience is not passivity. The patient person is working, is planting, is tending, is reading, is building. But they are not anxious about the timing of the harvest. They have internalized the truth that you cannot pull a crop out of the ground before its time without destroying it. And so they work without panic, and they wait without resentment, trusting the natural laws that they've learned to align themselves with. Now, before I go further, I want to pause on something that doesn't get enough attention in conversations about success. And that is the question of language. The words you use, the specific, particular words you use to describe your situation, your future, your capabilities, those words are not innocent. They are not neutral. They are actually a form of programming. They shape the internal story your mind tells about who you are and what is possible. I've noticed two very different kinds of language in people, and the difference tells you a great deal about their trajectory. Some people speak about their situation in what I call the language of permanence. That's just the way I am. I've always been this way. I'm not good at that. Things never work out for me. Now, do you hear what that language is doing? It is freezing the situation. It is treating a temporary condition as a fixed identity. And the mind, which is a remarkably obedient instrument, takes those statements seriously and sets about confirming them. Other people speak in the language of development, not foolishly, not in the wishful, groundless way of someone who ignores reality, but honestly and with direction. I haven't learned that yet. I'm working on that skill. That's an area where I have room to grow. Do you hear the difference? That language keeps the door open. It acknowledges the current reality without making it permanent. It treats the self as a work in progress rather than a finished product. I remember Mr. Schoaf pointing this out to me with characteristic directness one afternoon. He said, "Jim, listen to yourself for one day. Just listen. And count how many times you close a door with your words that doesn't need to be closed." I did that exercise. It was an uncomfortable afternoon. I hadn't realized how thoroughly I had built my own cage with my own vocabulary. The language of limitation will always fight against your disciplines. It's very hard to read seriously and build daily habits of growth while simultaneously telling yourself that you're not the kind of person who does those things. The story has to change. The language has to change, not into fantasy, into an honest, forward-directed description of someone who is in the process of becoming. Words are seeds too. Plant them with care. And let me go one step further on this subject because I think it deserves it. The story you tell yourself about why you are where you are, that story has enormous power over where you will end up. Some people have a story that features them as the primary actor. In their story, their current results, the good and the difficult alike, are primarily the consequence of their choices. The skills they developed or didn't, the books they read or left unread, the disciplines they kept or abandoned, the associations they cultivated or neglected. That's a humbling story to tell yourself. It requires you to accept responsibility for outcomes that are sometimes painful, but it is also an enormously powerful story. Because if the choices were yours, the choices going forward are also yours. You are not a passenger in your own life. You are the driver. Other people have a story that features them primarily as a recipient of things done to them. The economy did this. The boss did that. The family they were born into. The neighborhood. The timing. Now, I am not denying that circumstances are real and sometimes genuinely difficult. They are. But here is what I observe about people who center their story on circumstances. They wait. They wait for the circumstances to change. They wait for someone else to fix the situation. And while they wait, their disciplines atrophy, and their skills don't develop, and the seasons pass without planting. The person who takes ownership of their story, even the difficult parts, stops waiting. They start planting. They start reading. They start building the disciplines and the knowledge and the associations that will attract the life they want. Not because the past was necessarily their fault, but because the future most certainly is their responsibility. That shift from a story of things happening to you to a story of you happening to your circumstances is perhaps the single most transformative change in philosophy a person can make. Let me add something here about the role of environment in personal development, because I find this to be one of the most underappreciated levers a person has access to. Your environment is speaking to you constantly. The books on your shelves, or the absence of books, are communicating something to you every day about what kind of person you are. The conversations that happen in your home, the topics that dominate, the tone that prevails, those are forming your children and forming you, regardless of your intentions. The physical space you work in, the order or the disorder of it, the presence or absence of beauty and purpose, all of it is shaping the frequency of your thinking without your realizing it. The wise person doesn't just work on themselves in the abstract. They engineer their environment. They put books in visible places. They remove from their daily view the things that pull their thinking downward. They create a space, even a small one, even a corner of a room, that is dedicated to the activities of growth, reading, thinking, planning, writing. I remember visiting a man years ago, a man who had built a remarkable career from very modest beginnings. And I noticed that his study, though small, was lined with books on 3 walls. Biographies of great men and women, philosophy, history, business principles. He told me he had read every one of them at least once, some of them 3 or 4 times. And when he spoke, you could hear it. Not in the sense that he was quoting passages, that kind of showing off has never impressed me, but in the depth of his references, in the breadth of his perspective, in the quiet confidence with which he addressed complex problems. The room he had built, the environment he had curated, had built a man. Your environment is either an asset or a liability. It is either working for your development or against it. And unlike many things in life, your environment is very largely within your power to change. Not overnight, not dramatically, but incrementally, deliberately, with the same patient wisdom you'd bring to any garden worth tending. Add a good book to your shelf. Remove a distraction. Make one corner of your home say, every time you walk past it, this is a house where someone is growing. Now, I want to speak for a while about something I call the philosophy of the slight edge. The idea that the distance between extraordinary results and ordinary results is often smaller than it appears, but requires a consistency of discipline that most people are unwilling to sustain. Here is the remarkable thing about small disciplines. They don't look like much in the moment. Reading for 30 minutes each morning doesn't feel heroic. Spending 15 minutes reviewing your goals and your progress doesn't feel like a significant act. Going to bed 30 minutes earlier so you can rise 30 minutes earlier and have time to think and plan before the day begins. None of these things feel dramatic, but compound them over years. Apply them consistently, not perfectly. I want to be careful to say this because perfectionism is the enemy of consistency. Not perfectly, but consistently, with the same patient commitment you'd bring to caring for a garden. And these small daily disciplines will produce results that will astonish you. They will astonish others. They will look from the outside like sudden success, like luck, like an overnight transformation. There is no such thing as overnight transformation. There is only the accumulated weight of days, invested wisely or squandered carelessly. The person who reads 30 minutes every morning for 10 years has read, at a conservative pace, somewhere between 50 and 70 serious books. The person who doesn't reads approximately nothing. In 10 years, these two people will live in entirely different worlds, not because one was luckier or more talented than the other, but because one invested their mornings and the other didn't. The person who reviews their financial goals weekly, who tracks their income and expenses with honesty and discipline, who makes small adjustments month by month, in 10 years, that person will have a fundamentally different relationship with money than the person who never looks at the numbers. Not because of some dramatic windfall, because of the accumulation of thousands of small, disciplined decisions that compound over time. Here's something I want you to really sit with. The same activities that produce extraordinary results over 10 years produce almost nothing visible in 30 days. And that is the great test. That is where most people fail. Not because the disciplines aren't working, but because they can't see them working yet. The 30-day version of the person who reads every morning looks almost identical to the person who doesn't, externally anyway. anyway. But internally, something has already begun. A habit is forming. A perspective is shifting. A philosophical foundation is being laid. And by the time the difference becomes visible externally, by the time the harvest appears above the soil, the gap has become too wide for most people to understand how it happened. From the outside, it looks like a sudden transformation. From the inside, it was always just the next morning's reading. Let me give you an analogy I find useful. Imagine two ships leaving the same port on the same morning. Both ships are headed for the horizon. One ship sets its course 2 degrees to the north of the other. At departure, the two ships are essentially identical in their position. After the first hour, the difference is barely perceptible. After a full day at sea, you'd need careful instruments to measure the gap. But after a month, after a year, those two ships are on entirely different continents. 2 degrees of difference at the beginning becomes 2,000 miles of separation at the end. Your daily disciplines are the 2 degrees. Every day you read and someone else doesn't, you are setting your course 2 degrees different. It doesn't feel like much. It doesn't look like much. But hold that heading, and in 10 years you will find yourself somewhere so different from where you'd have been that the distance will be almost incomprehensible. That is what I mean by the slight edge. It's not about dramatic gestures or heroic efforts. It's about the steady, patient, compounding effect of small disciplines applied consistently in the right direction. This is what I mean by working harder on yourself than you do on your job. It doesn't mean working less on your job. It means adding to your day and to your inner life the disciplines that develop you as a human being, not just as a worker. Because a better human being will inevitably produce better work. A more capable, more thoughtful, more disciplined human being will inevitably bring more value to the marketplace. And the marketplace will notice. It always does. Let me say something now about the role of service in all of this, because I think there is a dimension of attraction that people often miss when they focus too exclusively on self-improvement.
Here's what I want you to understand. The most reliable way to increase your own value in the marketplace is to become extraordinarily good at serving others, at solving their problems, at understanding their needs so well that you can address them before they're even fully articulated. I'm not talking about servility. I'm not talking about doing whatever anyone asks of you without judgment or discernment. I'm talking about the genuine, disciplined, skilled application of your talents and knowledge to the needs of other people. Here's the philosophical principle behind this. Success, in the truest sense, is not a solitary accomplishment. It is always relational. It is always connected to the service of others, either directly or indirectly. The doctor is paid well because of what they know and what they can do for people who are suffering. The businessman is rewarded because he has created something that serves the needs of others at scale. The teacher changes lives because she brings knowledge and understanding to people who need it. When you ask yourself, how can I attract more success? The honest answer is usually, how can I serve better? How can I solve problems more effectively? How can I bring more knowledge, more skill, more thoughtfulness, more genuine care to the people I work with and work for? That question, asked seriously and answered diligently, is perhaps the most direct route to increasing your value and therefore your reward. I've watched people spend their careers asking the wrong question. They ask, how can I get more? And the marketplace looks at them, sees what they're offering, does the calculation, and gives them what they're worth. But the person who asks, how can I give more? How can I serve better? How can I become more capable of solving the problems that matter? The marketplace finds a way to compensate that person generously. Because genuine value is rare. The marketplace is hungry for it. It will pay almost any price for it when it finds it. Now, I want to spend some time speaking to those of you who have tried, who have genuinely, sincerely, repeatedly tried to build a better life, and who are tired, whose efforts haven't yet produced the results they expected, who are beginning to wonder whether the principles I'm describing actually apply to them, or whether they are reserved for some other category of person with some other set of advantages. I want to speak to that weariness with great care because it is real, and it deserves to be treated seriously rather than dismissed with easy enthusiasm. Here is what I have observed. The person who keeps showing up, not perfectly, but consistently, not without doubt, but in spite of it. The person who keeps reading even when they're not sure it's making a difference, keeps refining their daily disciplines even when the results are invisible, keeps examining and improving their philosophy even when the world around them sees no evidence of change. That person is in the process of becoming. And the process of becoming is not always visible. It is internal. It is quiet. It is happening in the soil before it appears in the plant. I remember a conversation I had with a woman at a seminar. It must have been 25 years ago now, in a conference hall in Houston on a wet November evening. And she said to me,
with the kind of exhaustion that comes from years rather than days. Mr. Rohn, I've been reading and studying and applying everything I've learned for 3 years, and nothing has changed. And I looked at her carefully before I answered. I said, "Has nothing changed, or has the change not yet become visible?" She thought about that for a long time. What I've learned is this: the internal change, the change in thinking, in philosophy, in habits, in attitude, almost always precedes the external change by a significant interval. The farmer plants the seed, and for weeks nothing is visible. The soil looks exactly the same. To a casual observer, nothing is happening. But underground, in the dark, the seed has already split open. The root has already formed. The shoot is already reaching upward. The harvest is already in motion. So if you are working the disciplines and you're not yet seeing results, I want you to consider the possibility that you are in the interval, that you are between the planting and the appearing, that the harvest you've earned is already in motion beneath the surface, that your job right now is not to dig up the seed to check on it, but to keep tending, keep reading, keep building, keep trusting the natural laws that work as reliably underground as they do in the open air. Don't abandon the field in winter. Don't pull up the seeds in spring just because the sprout hasn't appeared yet. Let the seasons do their work. You do yours. That's the arrangement. And let me add something about the emotion of discouragement specifically, because it deserves more than a passing mention. Discouragement is one of the most common experiences on the path of personal development, and one of the most dangerous because it mimics wisdom. It arrives wearing the clothes of realism. It speaks in a calm, reasonable voice and says things like, "Perhaps this simply isn't for you. Perhaps you've invested enough without adequate return. Perhaps the people who told you this was possible were simply more fortunate than you." Discouragement is almost never accurate. It is almost always a seasonal phenomenon, something that arrives during winter and departs with the spring. But it is so convincing in the moment that people mistake it for a permanent truth rather than a temporary condition. Here's the test I've applied to my own moments of discouragement over the years. I ask, am I discouraged because I've genuinely discovered that what I'm doing is wrong, that the direction itself is misguided? Or am I discouraged because results haven't come as quickly as I hoped? In my experience, 90% of discouragement is of the second kind. The direction is right. The disciplines are sound. The harvest is coming. The problem is only the timing, and the solution is only patience. But the person who hasn't internalized the philosophy of the seasons will often respond to that discouragement by changing direction, by trying something else, by starting a new cycle of planting and then abandoning it again at the first sign of a difficult summer. And so they rotate through seasons without ever staying long enough to experience a genuine fall. The one thing that separates the people who eventually flourish from the people who spend their whole lives circling the same ground is this: persistence calibrated by honest reflection. Not stubborn persistence, the kind that keeps doing exactly the same thing regardless of the evidence, but thoughtful persistence. The kind that says, I will evaluate whether my direction is right, and if it is, I will stay with it regardless of how long it takes. I've seen people give up 3 months before their harvest. I've watched it happen more times than I can count. They put in the work, they plant the seeds, they tend through the summer, and then, just as the first green shoots of real result are beginning to appear, they become convinced that nothing is growing, and they turn the field over. And someone else comes along and harvests what they planted. Don't do that. Please don't do that. Let me now speak about goals more specifically, because I want to make a distinction that I think is important and often overlooked. There are 2 kinds of goals. There are goals for what you want, the income, the house, the health, the relationship, and there are goals for who you want to become. And in my experience, the second kind is not just more important than the first. It is actually what produces the first. When I was young and first beginning to think seriously about my life, my goals were entirely of the first kind. I want to make a certain amount of money. I want to live in a certain kind of house. I want to travel to certain places. And those are not wrong goals. They're fine goals, but they are incomplete as a system. The question that changed my approach was this: who must I become in order for those things to be the natural result of my daily life? Not what must I do? Who must I become? Because doing flows from being. The actions that a person of great discipline and knowledge and clear thinking takes naturally. They're not heroic acts for such a person. They're just what they do. The way a master carpenter naturally produces fine work, not because he's straining every moment to be excellent, but because excellence has become his nature through years of practice and study and genuine care. What do you need to become? What disciplines do you need to develop that you currently lack? What knowledge do you need to acquire? What habits are currently working against you that must be replaced with habits that will serve you? What associations need to shift? These are the questions that, if you'll sit with them honestly, not for 5 minutes while you're feeling enthusiastic, but consistently, over time, in the quiet moments of genuine self-examination, these are the questions that will redesign your life from the inside out. And here is what I promise you. When you change from the inside, when your thinking shifts, when your disciplines become genuine, when your philosophy is actually examined and rebuilt on principles you've chosen deliberately rather than inherited accidentally, the outside will eventually, inevitably follow. Not because the universe is a vending machine that dispenses rewards for self-improvement, but because you will naturally begin to make different decisions. You will naturally begin to see opportunities you previously couldn't see. You will naturally attract the associations of people who are operating at the level you're now operating at. You will naturally bring more value to the marketplace, and the marketplace will naturally respond in kind. That's not magic. That's not a wish. That's the reliable operation of natural laws that have been working the same way since the first season of the first harvest on the first farm. And let me say something about this process of becoming that I think is easy to miss in the ordinary bustle of a day. The process is not always pleasant. Growth is not always comfortable. There will be days when the reading feels effortful and the disciplines feel burdensome, and the gap between where you are and where you want to be feels wider rather than narrower. There will be seasons, sometimes long ones, where everything seems to be asking of you and nothing seems to be giving back. The temptation in those seasons is to question the principles, to wonder whether the whole philosophy is simply mistaken and the people who told you to invest in yourself were overly optimistic or talking about someone different than you. I understand that temptation. I've felt it myself in specific seasons and specific circumstances that were genuinely difficult. Here is what I came back to every time. I asked myself, of all the possible explanations for my current situation, which one leaves me with the most power to change it? And the answer was always the same. The explanation that locates the cause in my own choices and disciplines and philosophy. That explanation, even when it's humbling, gives me power. Because if I caused it, I can change it. I can read more. I can examine my associations. I can rebuild my philosophy. I can strengthen my disciplines. I can plant more carefully in the next spring. That is always the most empowering answer to the question of why. And it is usually also the most accurate one. There is one more thing I want to say before we leave this subject entirely. And it is perhaps the simplest thing of all. The philosophy of attraction, the idea that success flows toward the person who has developed themselves to receive and sustain it, is not reserved for exceptional people. It is not a theory built on the lives of geniuses or the fortunate or the naturally gifted. It was built, in my own experience, on the life of a farm boy from Idaho who was broke at 25 and had the good fortune to meet a man who told him the truth. The truth that what he needed most was not a better opportunity, but a better self. A more disciplined, more thoughtful, more educated, more genuinely valuable self. That truth, received and acted upon consistently across the decades, produced everything that has followed. Not luck, not talent, philosophy, discipline, the patient, faithful, daily work of becoming. Let me spend a few moments on what I call the disciplines of the morning, because I believe the way you begin your day has an extraordinary amount to do with the quality of what that day produces. Some people begin their day reactively. The alarm sounds. They immediately check their phone, immediately immerse themselves in the incoming signals of the world, the news, the messages, the requests, the noise, before they've had a single moment of quiet thought, before they've reminded themselves of their goals, reviewed their plan, centered their thinking in their own priorities and values. And so their day begins as a response to everyone else's agenda rather than a pursuit of their own. The disciplines of the morning look different for different people, but they share a common quality. They are intentional. They happen before the reactive demands of the day begin. They are about filling your mind with what you've chosen, rather than with what arrives uninvited. For me, mornings meant reading. They meant time with my notebook, writing down thoughts and observations and questions. They meant reviewing what I was grateful for, not as a pleasant exercise, but as a genuine recalibration of my attention toward what was already working, rather than what wasn't yet. They meant thinking about the one or two most important things I needed to do that day to move toward my most important goals. This takes time. 20 minutes, 30, an hour. And I know the common response: I don't have that time. My mornings are already too full. The children, the commute, the demands. Let me offer you an honest challenge. If you rose 30 minutes earlier than you currently do, 30 minutes, not 2 hours, and spent those 30 minutes in the disciplines I've described, how different would your year look? How different would your decade look? What would you have read? What would you have thought about? What clarity would you have developed that you currently lack? The time is there. It always is. The question is whether you're willing to make the small sacrifice that the discipline requires. Miss a meal, but don't miss your morning disciplines. Now let me talk about something I consider one of the most important and least discussed aspects of attraction, and that is the question of your word, your personal integrity, the correspondence between what you say you'll do and what you actually do. Here's what I've observed over a lifetime of studying successful people. People who attract success, really attract it, in the deep and sustained way I'm describing, they have a particular quality that I can only call reliability. Their word means something. When they say they will do a thing, they do it. When they make a commitment, they honor it. When they set a deadline for themselves, they meet it. This might seem like a separate topic from philosophy and self-development, but it's not. It's central to it. Because here's what integrity, in the practical behavioral sense I'm describing, here's what it does. It builds confidence. Not the shallow confidence of self-affirmation, but the deep, earned confidence of a person who knows from repeated experience that they can be relied upon, including by themselves. Every time you make a commitment to yourself and break it, even a small one, even one that nobody else knows about, you subtract slightly from the trust you have in your own word. And a person who doesn't fully trust their own word cannot be fully committed to anything. They always hold something in reserve. They always have a quiet escape hatch in the back of their mind. But every time you keep a commitment, especially a hard one, especially one made to yourself when nobody is watching, you add to that account. You build the internal evidence that you are someone who follows through. And a person with that evidence can take on bigger commitments, harder disciplines, more challenging goals, because they have the proven track record in their own mind of being capable of exactly that. I want to connect this specifically to the financial dimension of life, because I think it's where integrity is most nakedly tested. Let me ask you something. Is your financial life an honest reflection of your stated values, or is there a gap? Do you spend according to your priorities, or do you spend according to your impulses and then explain it afterward? Do you save as consistently as you tell yourself you should, or is saving something you plan to do when things are a little easier, a day that, interestingly, never quite arrives? I remember when I was building my own financial life back up from the ground. And it was from the ground, let me tell you, not from some modest foundation. I had to face some deeply uncomfortable truths about my relationship with money. Not about income, but about my habits. About the dozens of small, unremarkable, nearly invisible financial decisions I made every week without any real thought. Each one was trivial. Accumulated over a year, they told a story I was ashamed to read. And I realized that the problem wasn't income, it was integrity. Not moral integrity in some grand sense, but the day-to-day correspondence between what I said I valued, building security, building freedom, building the capacity to live on my own terms, and how I actually behaved with the dollars I had. There was a gap, a large, quiet, expensive gap. Closing that gap, making my financial behavior honest, making it consistent with my actual stated values, was one of the most important disciplines I ever developed. Not because of the dollars saved, though those matter, but because the discipline of financial honesty strengthened something in my character that carried over into every other area of my life. The person who can look at their spending and tell the truth about what it reveals is the same person who can look at their habits and tell the truth, who can look at their associations and tell the truth, who can look at their results and tell the truth. Honesty in one dimension builds the muscle for honesty in all dimensions. This is why I say, start with small promises and keep them. Make a commitment to read for 30 minutes tomorrow morning and do it. Make a commitment to go to bed at a certain hour and honor it.
Make a commitment to call someone you've been meaning to call and make the call. Small things, but keep them. Because the discipline of keeping small commitments builds the character necessary to keep large ones. You become what you repeatedly do. That's not a platitude. That's a biological and psychological truth. The person you are 10 years from now is being constructed today, brick by brick, decision by decision, commitment by commitment. Let me now say something about habit and character, because I don't think you can have a complete conversation about attraction without addressing these two elements directly.
Habit is one of the most powerful forces in human life and one of the least examined. Most people have never seriously looked at their daily habits, what they actually do in the course of a typical day, and asked whether those habits are building toward the life they want or quietly building away from it. Not once, certainly, have they done this systematically. And yet those habits, accumulated over years, are the actual architecture of their results. Not the ideas they have about themselves, not the potential they believe they possess, not the intentions they feel so strongly on New Year's morning. The habits, the actual daily repeated behaviors. Here is a principle I want you to take away. You don't get what you wish for. You get what you habitually do. And the gap between what most people wish for and what they habitually do is, when you examine it honestly, enormous.
Someone wishes they were financially independent, but their habitual relationship with money involves spending more than they earn and giving no serious thought to the difference. Someone wishes they were more knowledgeable, but their habitual use of an evening involves activities that deposit nothing of lasting value into their mind. Someone wishes they had stronger relationships, but their habitual attention is directed at everything except the people they say matter most.
I'm not saying these things to criticize. I've had each of those gaps in my own life at various points, and some of them were embarrassingly large. I'm saying it because the gap between our wishes and our habits is where the work is. And the great news, the genuinely liberating news, is that habits can be changed. They can be replaced. The discipline of building a new habit is difficult, but it is finite. It has a beginning and an end. And once a new habit is established, once the new behavior has become as automatic as the old one, you have permanently raised your floor. That's the phrase I want you to hold on to. Raising your floor. Every habit you establish that serves your development raises the minimum level of your daily investment. You cannot fall below it without noticing. And the person whose floor is high, whose absolute minimum daily investment in themselves is already significant, that person is building something remarkable, even on their worst days. The person whose floor is low, whose habits of self-investment are thin and optional and frequently skipped, is building very little, even on their best days. Because best days are occasional. Floors are every day. Now let me say something about character, because it is slightly different from habit, though deeply related. Character is what you do when nobody is watching, when there's no reward in sight and no punishment for failing to perform, when the discipline could be easily skipped without any visible consequence. Character is the quality of the person who does the right thing, who keeps the commitment, reads the book, tends the discipline, not because they are being graded or observed, but because they have become the kind of person for whom doing those things is an expression of who they are. I have watched, over decades, the difference between people who build disciplines based on external pressure, the accountability partner, the public commitment, the financial stake, and those who have internalized the disciplines into character. And here's what I've observed. External pressure produces results. It works, sometimes quite well, but it produces results only as long as the pressure is maintained. The moment the accountability structure disappears, so does the behavior. Character, on the other hand, is self-sustaining. The person of genuine character doesn't need someone to check whether they read today. They don't need an external system to ensure they keep their commitments. They do it because the doing is now integrated into their sense of themselves, because not doing it would feel like a small betrayal of who they have decided to be. How do you build character from habits? How does the external discipline become internal? Slowly, through repetition, through doing the right thing long long after the novelty is worn off, long after the enthusiasm is faded, long after the initial motivation has been replaced by the simple, quiet choice to remain consistent. And here is the sign that a habit has become character. You stop experiencing it as a sacrifice. You stop thinking of reading as something you have to make time for. You simply read, the way you simply breathe. The discipline has been so thoroughly integrated that its absence would feel like something missing rather than something saved.
That's the goal. Not white-knuckled self-control. Character. The kind of person who has so thoroughly built the daily disciplines into the fabric of who they are that success is not something they attract occasionally when everything lines up correctly. It is something they attract continuously because they have become continuously worthy of it.
I remember reading once about a sculptor who was asked how he created such beautiful work. He said something that stayed with me for decades. He said, "I remove everything that isn't the sculpture." I've thought about that in the context of character development ever since. Building character is not about adding more, it's about removing. Removing the habits that don't serve, the associations that hold you back, the beliefs that were given to you without your consent and have been running your life in directions you didn't choose. Remove what isn't the sculpture. What's left is who you actually want to be. Let me now say something about the way that success becomes self-sustaining once a certain level of personal development has been achieved. Here is what I've noticed about people who have genuinely become the kind of person that success flows toward naturally. They don't really think about success anymore in the anxious, pursuing way. They think about their work. They think about the people they serve. They think about the quality of what they're doing, the depth of their knowledge, the refinement of their skills. They think about how to give more and serve better and understand more clearly. And because their attention is on the work rather than the reward comes more freely. This is one of the paradoxes of attraction that I find most beautiful. The person least focused on getting is often the person who receives the most, because their energy, all of it, is directed at becoming and contributing rather than grasping and accumulating. There is a kind of desperation in pursuit, a tightness, and people can sense that tightness. The marketplace can sense it. The people around you can sense it. And desperation, however understandable in difficult times, tends to repel rather than attract. It signals that you are operating from a place of scarcity rather than abundance. And the person who sees themselves as fundamentally scarce in resources, in opportunity, in the capacity to create value, will tend to confirm that self-assessment through their choices and their disciplines. The person who has done the work of personal development, who has built genuine knowledge and genuine skills, and a genuine, examined, deeply held philosophy, that person operates from a different orientation. They know what they know. They know what they can do. They know that the value they bring is real, not imagined. And from that foundation of genuine confidence, they move through the world in a way that is fundamentally attractive. Attractive not in a superficial sense, but in the way that mastery is always attractive. The way that genuine competence is always attractive. The way that calm, unhurried wisdom is always attractive. People want to be near it. They want to hire it, to work with it, to learn from it, to invest in it. And here I want to say something about a dimension of all this that is easy to overlook when you're focused on building skills and disciplines and value. I want to say something about meaning, about the quality of a life fully engaged with its own development. The people I've known who are most deeply satisfied, not just financially successful, not just recognized or prominent, but genuinely satisfied in the way that reaches all the way down to the floor of who they are. Those people share something remarkable. They are interested. Genuinely, persistently, passionately interested in the world around them and in their own development within it. They have not arrived at a point of knowing enough and being enough and having enough. They remain curious. They remain, in the best sense of the word, students. There is a kind of aliveness that belongs to the person who is still growing, a quality of presence and engagement that the person who has stopped growing simply doesn't possess. I've seen it in men and women in their 70s and 80s, people who are still reading, still questioning, still willing to have their minds changed by a good argument or a well-observed fact. There is a light behind their eyes that has nothing to do with age or circumstance. It is the light of a mind that is not closed. And I've seen the opposite in people in their 30s and 40s. People who have, without quite meaning to, stopped growing, who know what they know and have decided it's enough,
who have settled into a comfortable certainty that is really just the slow extinguishing of inquiry. And there is a flatness to those people, a kind of premature dimming. It's not their fault exactly. Nobody told them to keep growing, or if someone did, perhaps the message wasn't delivered in a way they could hear. But the cost is real, and it's visible, and it grows over time. Here's what I want you to understand about personal development as a philosophy of life. It is not primarily a strategy for getting more. It is a strategy for being more, for showing up to each day with more to bring, for experiencing the world with greater depth and nuance and appreciation, for having conversations that actually go somewhere, for solving problems that matter, for contributing something to the people around you that they genuinely need. The ancient teachers were right about this. The good life, the examined, developed, disciplined, continually growing life, is not just more productive, it is more alive, more fully human, more engaged with the actual texture of experience rather than skimming the surface of it in distraction and anxiety. And here is the truth I want to leave you with before we come to the close of this long conversation. The disciplines of personal development are not a burden. They are not the price you pay for success. They are the success. The reading is not what you do so that one day you can have a better life. The reading is part of the better life. Right now, today, in the morning when the house is quiet and the book is open and your mind is fully engaged with something that matters. The discipline of keeping commitments is not what you do to become trustworthy. It is the actual experience of being trustworthy, happening in real time, building the person you've decided to be, one kept promise at a time. The work of examining and rebuilding your philosophy is not preparation for living differently. It is already living differently. It is already the change. Don't wait for the harvest to start feeling the richness of the season. The season is already rich. Every day of deliberate, disciplined growth is already a success, already a harvest of a different kind, the harvest of becoming who you meant to be. That's where you're headed, if you'll do the work. And the work, ultimately, is not complicated. It is not mysterious. It is not reserved for a particular type of person with a particular type of background. Read every day. Grow every year. Examine your philosophy honestly and rebuild it on principles you've chosen deliberately. Choose your associations with care and with intention. Practice the disciplines of the morning before the world gets a chance to set your agenda for you. Make promises and keep them, first to yourself, then to others. Plant in the spring. Tend in the summer. Harvest in the fall. Use the winter for preparation. Be patient, not passive, patient. And understand, at a level deeper than intellectual agreement, at the level of genuine conviction, that success is not something you go get. It is something you earn the right to attract by becoming the person whose daily habits and thinking and values and skills and disciplines make that attraction not just possible, but inevitable. It has always worked this way. It will always work this way. The laws are not negotiable, but they are available to everyone willing to align with them. Now let me speak in these final moments about the long view, because I think one of the greatest errors a person can make in the pursuit of a good life is the error of impatience, of holding themselves to a timeline that is entirely at odds with the natural rhythms of growth. I think about the oak tree. Do you know how long it takes an acorn to become an oak? Not weeks, not months, years, decades. And in those early years, when the tree is still a sapling, still vulnerable to being damaged or uprooted or overshadowed, in those years, nothing visible about it suggests what it will become. A person walking by would see only a small tree, nothing impressive, nothing commanding. But inside, through those years, the roots are going down. Deep, strong, wide-spreading roots that will eventually support a structure of tremendous weight and beauty. The visible growth will come, the canopy will spread, the bark will thicken and roughen and acquire the character of decades. But first, the roots. Always first, the roots. You are building your roots right now. Whether you know it or not, whether you intend to or not, every day you are building something. The question is only whether what you're building is a root system that will one day support something extraordinary, or a surface spread that looks quick but has no depth. Let me say something about the difference between speed and depth, because I think it's one of the central confusions of our era. We live in a time that worships speed, quick results, rapid transformation, shortcuts to outcomes that used to require years of patient effort. And some of that speed is genuinely useful. Information travels faster, Connections are made more easily. Certain practical advantages can be gained more quickly than before. I'm not naive about the value of efficiency, but here is what speed cannot do. Speed cannot build character. Character is built through the repeated experience of choosing the harder thing when the easier thing is available. Speed cannot build genuine competence. Competence requires repetition, failure, correction, more repetition, and the long accumulation of what I call the wisdom of practice. Speed cannot build the kind of deep-rooted confidence that comes from having kept 100 difficult commitments to yourself over years. That confidence cannot be downloaded. It cannot be skipped to. It is only built one kept promise at a time. And speed, above all, cannot replace the seasons. The farmer who plants in April and tries to harvest in May will have nothing to show but dead soil and wasted seed. The natural law of gestation does not negotiate. It does not respond to ambition or urgency or modern convenience. It simply operates, as it always has, on its own schedule. And the only appropriate response to that is alignment, not frustration. The long view, then, is not pessimism. It is not the resignation of someone who has given up on quick results. It is the practical wisdom of someone who understands how things actually work and has decided to work with those laws rather than against them. Here is what I have found when I look at people who have genuinely built a remarkable life. Not the flash-in-the-pan variety, not the quick rise followed by the equally quick collapse, but the deep, durable, well-constructed kind of life that holds up under pressure. They share a common quality that I can only describe as a certain serenity about time. They are not in a hurry. Not because they lack ambition. They have tremendous ambition. But their ambition is calibrated to a longer arc. They think in years, not weeks. They plant crops that won't be ready for seasons. They invest in disciplines whose payoff is measured in decades. And because their time frame is long, they are not rattled by the short-term fluctuations that send less grounded people into panic. That serenity is one of the most attractive qualities a person can possess. It communicates, without a word being spoken. I know what I'm building. I know how to build it, and I know it will take time, and I have accepted that willingly. That is an extraordinarily compelling quality. That is a quality that draws people, opportunities, and resources toward a person rather than pushing them away. Now, I want to close this conversation with something personal, something I've thought about for a long time and want to share with you carefully. I grew up watching my father farm. He was not a complicated man in the way the world often uses that word. He didn't have extensive formal education. He didn't travel widely or move in influential circles. He was a man who got up early, worked steadily, and went to bed with the satisfaction of a day well used. And the fields he worked told the story of his philosophy more eloquently than any speech could. He never planted a seed he wasn't willing to tend. He never started a season he wasn't prepared to finish. He understood in a deep and entirely practical way that the relationship between effort and harvest was not optional and not negotiable. You did the work, all of it, in the right order, in the right season, with the right care. And then you waited, with confidence rather than anxiety, for nature to do its part. I've spent my adult life applying that same philosophy to human development and to the building of a life. And what I've found, after more years than I care to count, after more conversations than I can remember, after the accumulated weight of watching thousands of people grow and just as many refuse to, what I've found is that my father had it right. He just didn't know it applied to more than farming. Everything applies to more than the narrow context in which it's first encountered. The laws of the harvest apply to every human endeavor. Prepare the soil, which means develop your mind and your character. Plant good seeds, which means make good daily choices and build disciplines that will compound over time. Tend through the summer, which means don't abandon the work just because it becomes difficult or invisible for a season. And trust the harvest, which means believe, at a level below argument, that the natural laws you have aligned yourself with will deliver, in the appointed season, exactly what the quality of your planting and tending deserves. Not more, not less. Exactly what you've earned.
Now, I've spoken today about many things, about philosophy and language and associations, about the seasons and the soil and the patience of the farmer, about self-education and the marketplace and the daily disciplines that build a life from the inside out, about integrity and service and the long, slow, deeply satisfying work of becoming. And I want to close with this. None of what I've said today requires extraordinary talent. None of it requires a particular background, or a particular set of advantages, or a particular kind of luck. What it requires is the willingness to take yourself seriously as a student of your own life. The willingness to examine your philosophy and rebuild it on solid ground. The willingness to invest in your own development with the same seriousness you'd give to any important project.
And the willingness to be patient, truly, genuinely patient, not passive, working every day with the quiet diligence of the farmer, but patient about the timing, patient enough to let the natural laws do their work without trying to hurry them along or second-guess them or abandon them during the interval between planting and harvest. Some people will read these words and feel the familiar resistance, the inner voice that says, yes, but my situation is different. My circumstances are harder. The timeline I have is shorter. And to that voice, I want to say something with great gentleness and equal firmness. The laws don't make exceptions. Not for your timeline, not for your circumstances, not for your particular brand of urgency. They apply with the same patient consistency to everyone who either aligns with them or fights against them. Align with them. That is my simple invitation.
Align with the truth that success is not something you pursue. It is something you attract by becoming, by reading, by growing, by building genuine value, by serving others better, by keeping your word, by choosing your associations with care, by using every season, including winter, as a teacher rather than an enemy. Do those things. Do them consistently. Do them not for a week or a month, but for years. Do them with the patience of the farmer who understands that the harvest doesn't come on his schedule, but that it does come reliably and generously to those who have done the work. Go deep. Build slowly and solidly. Read the books that challenge you. Keep the promises that cost you something. Tend the disciplines that don't yet feel natural. Examine the philosophy you've inherited and replace whatever is weak with something you forged yourself through experience and reflection and genuine thought.
I've spent my whole adult life thinking about why some people flourish and most people flounder. And after all that time, after all that study and observation and personal experiment, I keep coming back to the same simple answer. The people who flourish are the people who worked on themselves as seriously and as persistently as they worked on anything else. They understood that the primary project of a human life is the development of the human being at the center of it. Not to the exclusion of service, not to the exclusion of relationships and work and contribution, but as the foundation of all those things. Because you cannot give what you don't have. You cannot serve at a level beyond your current capacity. You cannot attract what you have not yet prepared yourself to receive. Become more, and you will have more to give. Have more to give, and the world will give more to you. Not always immediately, not always in the way you expect, but reliably, consistently, with the patient certainty of the seasons. Success is not out there, running ahead of you, waiting to be caught. It is inside you, waiting to be built. The only question is whether you'll do the building. I believe you will.